Welcome to tonight's lesson on rhetorical appeals. By the end of tonight's lesson, you should be able to define ethos, logos, and pathos. The presentation will go through all three of these, as well as how to combine all three in one piece of writing. You should have out a piece of paper to take some notes as you go that will help you complete the Google Doc questions associated with this lesson. Rhetorical appeals are attempts by a speaker to persuade an audience, or to put another way, to say things that an audience would find appealing. After more than 2,000 years, we still refer to the classical rhetorical appeals identified by Aristotle: ethos, logos, and pathos, which appeal to the audience's trust, reason, and emotions, respectively. Ethos. Speakers appeal to ethos, Greek for character, to demonstrate that they are credible and trustworthy people who should be listened to when they discuss a given topic. The first component of ethos is the speaker's qualifications or authority, whether it is an explicit title or credential or a less formal sort of expertise or experience. What we as an audience want to know is if the person is qualified to speak on the matter. If a speaker is giving a lecture on raising children, we would likely heed her advice if she had formal qualifications, such as a PhD in child psychology. But we would also be willing to listen to a person with less formal qualifications, such as a father who successfully raised 3 children. This sort of appeal to ethos is often found outside of the text. For instance, when Lou Gehrig gave his speech, he did not introduce himself as Lou Gehrig, baseball legend. The audience was well aware of his accomplishments, and Gehrig's purpose was not to reinforce his legendary status. It was to reinforce his humanity, which brings us to the next aspect. Relying on authority and reputation can be an effective strategy, but it will only take you so far, because speakers are primarily judged not on who they are, but on what they say. There are a couple of ways that a speaker can build ethos when speaking on a subject. One is by sounding logical and reasonable. The second way is by demonstrating shared values with the audience. Think once again about Lou Gehrig and his speech reprinted at the beginning of last night's lesson. He brings the ethos of a legendary athlete to his speech, yet in the speech itself he enhances his ethos by remaining calm, reasonable, and dignified in the face of a debilitating disease, and by expressing his shared values with the fans. He emphasizes that he's just a regular guy and a good sport who shares the audience's love of baseball and family. And like them, he has known good luck and bad breaks. Remaining reasonable and emphasizing shared values is a great way to win over a hostile crowd. But in Gehrig's case, it was the perfect way to win the heart, not only of every baseball fan, but also of every American. Logos. Speakers appeal to logos, or reason, by offering clear, rational ideas. Appealing to logos, Greek for embodied thought, means thinking logically, having a clear main idea and using specific details, examples, facts, statistics, or expert testimony to support it. Creating a logical argument often involves defining the terms of the argument and identifying connections, such as causality. It can also require considerable research. Evidence from expert sources and authorities, facts, and quantitative data can be very persuasive if selected carefully and presented accurately. Sometimes writers and speakers add charts and graphs as a way to present such information, but often they weave this information into their written argument. Although at first Lou Gehrig's speech may seem largely emotional, it is actually based on irrefutable logic. He starts with the thesis that he is the luckiest man on the face of the earth, and supports it with 2 points. 1, the love and kindness he's received in his 17 years of playing baseball, and 2, a list of great people who have been his friends, family, and teammates in that time. One way to appeal to logos is to acknowledge a counterargument, that is, to anticipate objections or opposing views. Well, you might worry that raising an opposing view could poke a hole in your argument. You'll be vulnerable if you ignore ideas that run counter to yours. In acknowledging a counterargument, you agree or concede that an opposing argument may be true or reasonable, but then you refute, the validity of all or part of the arguments. This combination of concession and refutation actually strengthens your argument. It appeals to logos by demonstrating that you understand a viewpoint other than your own. You've thought through other evidence and you stand by your position. In longer, more complex texts, the writer may address the counterargument in greater depth, but Lou Gehrig simply concedes what some of his listeners may think, that his bad break could be a cause for discouragement or despair. Gehrig refutes this response, however, by saying that he has an awful lot to live for. Granted, he implies his concession rather than stating it outright, but in addressing it all, he acknowledges a contrasting way of viewing his situation. That is a counter-argument. Let's look at an example by Alice Waters, a famous chef, food activist, and author. Writing in The Nation, she argues for acknowledgement of the full consequences of what she calls our national diet. It's no wonder our national attention span is so short. We get hammered with the message that everything in our lives should be fast, cheap, and easy, especially food. So conditioned are we to believe that food should be almost free, that even the rich, who pay a tinier fraction of their incomes for food than has ever been paid in human history, grumble at the price of an organic peach, a peach grown for flavor and picked perfectly ripe by a local farmer, who is taking care of the land and paying his workers a fair wage. And yet, as the writer and farmer David Matsumoto recently pointed out, pound for pound, peaches that good still cost less than Twinkies. When we claim that eating well is an elitist preoccupation, we create a smoke screen that obscures the fundamental role our food decisions have in shaping the world. The reason that eating well in this country costs more than eating poorly is that we have a set of agricultural policies that subsidize fast food and make fresh, wholesome foods, which receive no government support, seem expensive. Organic food seems elitist only because industrial food is artificially cheap, with its real cost being charged to the public purse, the public health, and the environment. To develop a logical argument for better, healthier food for everyone, Waters refutes the counterargument that any food that is not fast, cheap, and easy is elitist. She does this by redefining terms such as cheap, eating well, expensive, and cost. She explains in a step-by-step fashion the smokescreen of price that many people use to argue that mass-produced fast food is the best alternative for all, but the very wealthy. She points out that organic foods seem elitist only because industrial food is artificially cheap. Waters asks her readers to think more deeply about the relationships among availability, production, and distribution of food. She appeals to reason. Pathos. Pathos is an appeal to emotions, values, desires, and hopes on the one hand, or fears and prejudice on the other. Although an argument that appeals exclusively to the emotions is by definition weak, it's generally propagandistic in purpose and more polemic than persuasive. An effective speaker or writer understands the power of evoking an audience's emotions by using such tools as figurative language, personal anecdotes, and vivid images. Lou Gehrig uses the informal first-person I quite naturally, which reinforces the friendly sense that this is a guy who is speaking on no one's behalf but his own. He chooses words with strong positive connotations: grand, greatest, wonderful, honored, blessing. He uses one image, tower of strength, that may not seem very original but strikes the right note. It is a well-known description that his audience understands. In fact, they probably have used it themselves. But of course, the most striking appeal to pathos is the poignant contrast between Gehrig's horrible diagnosis and his public display of courage. Let's look at a more direct example of pathos. As a vice presidential candidate, Richard Nixon gave a speech in 1952 defending himself against allegations of inappropriate use of campaign funds. In it, he related this anecdote, which is the reason that the speech will forever be known as the Checkers speech. One thing I should probably tell you, because if I don't, they'll probably be saying this about me too. We did get something, a gift, after the election. A man down in Texas heard Pat, Nixon's wife, on the radio mention the fact that our two youngsters would like to have a dog. And believe it or not, the day before we left on that campaign trip, we got a message from Union Station in Baltimore, saying they had a package for us. We went down to get it. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he'd sent all the way from Texas, black and white, spotted. And our little girl, Trisha, the 6-year-old, named it Checkers. And you know, the kids, like all kids, love the dog. And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it. This example of pathos tugs at every possible heartstring: puppies, children, warm paternal feelings, the excitement of getting a surprise package. All of these images fill us with empathetic feelings toward Nixon. Our emotions are engaged far more than our reason. Despite never truly addressing the campaign funds issue, Nixon's speech was a profound success with voters, who sent enough dog food to feed checkers for a year. And yet history has come to view this part of the speech as baldly manipulative. Images and pathos. You can appeal to pathos by using striking imagery in your writing, so it's no surprise that visual images often serve the same purpose. A dramatic photograph, for example, may lend an emotional component that strengthens an argument. Advertisements often lure customers with provocative images. Most political cartoons also rely on visual images to carry the impact of an argument. For example, in the Thanksgiving Table, a cartoon that appeared in the Scranton, Pennsylvania Times Tribune after Thanksgiving in 2013, artist John Cole juxtaposes two contrasting images of then and now to make his point. The first image is chock full of emotional associations. It depicts a family around the Thanksgiving table with the turkey ready to be carved, calling upon warm, nostalgic feelings of togetherness, love, stability, and even home cooking. We see a mother and father with younger people we assume are their children, the youngest still in a booster seat. They all sit quietly with heads bowed and hands folded, suggesting they are saying a prayer before their meal. Dressed modestly, they have eyes closed, to indicate a looking inward as they give thanks for the meal, one another, or what they might consider blessings in their lives. No conversation seems necessary at this moment because they are gathered together in harmony. Even the yellow glow, a halo, surrounding the scene suggests peace, warmth, and safety. In stark contrast is now, with an image that screams chaos and conflict even before we notice the specific details. The yellow glow around the table in the first image gives way to a bright yellow sign with junk in all capitals in a garish burgundy color. The expressions on the shoppers' faces range from fear to anger to greed, all with eyes wide and crazed, a stark contrast to the peaceful, closed eyes of the family in the top panel. There is frantic movement, such as the man pushing a cart with his baby in it, others clutching big boxes of would-be purchases, and two people fighting over an LED television set. The symbols above the characters' heads are familiar from cartoons as signs of harsh language. The open thanks give sign reminds us that this is what the people depicted are doing instead of sitting with family and friends around a traditional Thanksgiving table. Is the first image a true depiction of Thanksgiving dinner when we all know various conflicts may surface and all is not necessarily perfect? Perhaps not, but it is the ideal of how many of us would like to think life was then. And regardless of whether it reflects everyone's reality, the cartoonist makes his case that the peace and togetherness of the first image is preferable to the frantic materialism of the second. He engages our emotions by setting two very different scenes, juxtaposing them and using color and font to make the argument that desperate material strivings threaten traditional family values. Another way to appeal to pathos is through humor. Since we like to hear things that we already believe are true, our first reaction to anything that challenges our beliefs is often negative. We think, that's all wrong, and become defensive or outright offended. Humor works rhetorically by wrapping a challenge to our beliefs in something that makes us feel good, a joke, and thus makes us more receptive to the new idea. This goes not just for new ideas, but for people who are presenting those ideas. Whether it is a gentle, tongue-in-cheek teasing or bitter irony, humor may help a writer make a point without seeming to preach to the audience or take himself or herself too seriously. Political commentator Ruth Marcus employs gentle humor in the following essay from 2010, in which she addresses the Speaker of the House of Representatives and objects to the members of Congress using electronic devices during hearings and other deliberations. Even the title, a play on words, signals the humorous tone. Crackberry Congress. Let's look at a few passages. Mr. Speaker, please don't. Go ahead if you must and cut taxes. Slash spending. Repeal health care. I understand. Elections have consequences. But Blackberries and iPads and laptops on the House floor? Reconsider before it's too late. The current rules bar the use of a wireless telephone or personal computer on the floor of the House. The new rules, unveiled last week, add three dangerous words. They prohibit any device that impairs decorum. In other words, as long as you've turned down your cell phone ringer and you're not strolling around the floor chatting with your broker or helping the kids with their homework, feel free to tap away. If the Senate is the world's greatest deliberative body, the House is poised to be the world's greatest tweeting one. A few upfront acknowledgments. First, I'm not one to throw stones. I have been known to sneak a peek or 10 at my BlackBerry during meetings. For a time, my daughter had my ringtone set to sound like a squawking chicken. When I invariably forgot to switch to vibrate, the phone would cluck during meetings. In short, I have done my share of decorum impairing. Second, let's not get too dreamy about the House floor. John Boehner, the incoming Speaker, once passed out campaign checks from tobacco companies there. One of his former colleagues once came to the chamber with a paper bag on his head to dramatize his supposed embarrassment at fellow lawmakers' overdrafts at the House bank. Worse things have happened on the House floor than a game of Angry Birds. Check it out on the iPad. First of all, Marcus structures her criticism as a letter, which obviously is a fiction and sets a humorous tone right away. Who, after all, would begin a letter to the Speaker of the House by saying, "Please don't"? Marcus teases about decorum, yet she makes a serious point about connectivity as she exaggerates her fear that the House is poised to be the world's greatest tweeting body. Humor is also one of her strategies for establishing ethos in this case, as she says, "I'm not one to throw stones," and admits to checking her own BlackBerry during meetings. Overall, by taking a more lighthearted approach and not sounding prudish, Marcus makes her point about the inappropriateness of elected officials interacting with their electronic devices, while colleagues and others are debating important issues. Marcus could have marshaled all manners of examples that illustrate the decline in civility and courtesy in modern life, but then readers would likely have dismissed her as old-fashioned or shrill. By taking a humorous approach, she appeals to readers' sense of humor as well as their community values. Don't we want our elected officials to forego instantaneous communication for more thoughtful deliberations when they are making decisions about the laws of the land? Most authors don't rely on a single type of appeal to persuade their audience. They combine these appeals to create an effective argument, and the appeals themselves are inextricably bound together. It is only logical to listen to an expert on a subject, so having ethos can help build a foundation for an appeal to logos. It is also possible to to have build your ethos based on pathos. For example, who better to speak about the pain of losing a loved one than someone who has gone through it? The best political satirists can say things that are both perfectly logical and completely hilarious, thus appealing to both logos and pathos at the same time. Hopefully you understood everything in today's lesson. Please complete the Day 2 Google Doc that asks you to write your own definition of logos, pathos, and ethos, and you can also ask any questions about areas that you're still confused about. Tomorrow's activity in class will be to use what you've learned tonight and apply those to more readings and be able to identify the logos, pathos, and ethos in various activities. Have a good night and make sure to complete your Google form. Good night.